There's a lot of complaints out there about the DualSense Edge's battery life. That might be one knock on it from the early reviews, but no one's actually taken the time to sit down and do a real world test on it. In fact, Sony themselves have never confirmed a concrete number for the battery life. The only official statement from Sony, DualSense Edge's battery life will be moderately shorter than the base DualSense. That's it. The regular DualSense uses a 1560 milliamp hour battery. I'm pretty sure this $200 Edge controller uses an even smaller battery than the regular DualSense. Some early reports say that it lasts between 4 to 10 hours. That's a pretty wide range. So I'll be testing the battery life of the new Edge controller. This right here is the first time I'm turning on this particular unit and connecting it to my PS5. It's now 100% charged, full 3 bars. So let's turn on the timer and get this test started. I'll be mainly playing 3 games: Fortnite, God of War Ragnarok, and Call of Duty. I think that's a pretty good mix of some of the most popular games on the PlayStation 5. I'm pretty sure those are some of the most played games on the new console. So the Edge controller went down to 2 bars after 1.5 hours. It then went down to a single bar after only 2.5 hours. So this did get me a little worried. Down to 1 bar after 2.5 hours. That looks really bad. I was fully expecting this thing to go down to no bars and the battery warning before the 4-hour mark, but it actually didn't. The 0 bar warning came around 4 hours and 50 minutes. And the DualSense Edge controller powered off at 6 hours and 14 minutes. I did immediately turn the controller back on, but it only lasted about 11 seconds before turning off again. So yeah, in fact, it's completely dead. 6 hours of battery life. Is that good or bad? Well, the Xbox Elite 2 controller is this controller's main competitor that has between 35 and 40 hours of battery life. That big number makes the 6 hours of the Edge sound pretty bad. The standard DualSense controller has a battery life between 8 to 12 hours. I actually haven't done a full test on it. I will in the future though. Those numbers are likely for a brand new unit. I'm sure over time it does get worse. So comparing these two PS5 controllers, the more premium and more expensive Edge controller is gonna last at least 2 hours less than the cheaper DualSense. For me, 2 hours is a long time when you're talking about the full battery life only being 6 hours. I mean, that's 1/3. Now, while I was editing this video, someone did do a complete teardown. Thanks to this channel, Restore Technique, they showed the Edge having a smaller 1050 milliamp battery versus the 1560 milliamp of the regular DualSense. I guess Sony just didn't have the space for the larger battery in the Edge controller with all those added features. Let's go back in Sony's history a bit to the PlayStation 4. The DualShock 4 controller has a smaller 1000 milliamp hour battery. I did do a battery test on that in 2020 using a brand new Last of Us controller at that time. I sat down and played until the battery ran out on the PS4 DualShock 4. And here's our sort of the summary of the results. The low battery warning came on that controller at 10 hours and 41 minutes. And that DualShock controller lasted 12 hours and 17 minutes. So that doubled the battery life of the DualSense Edge. Now going back all the way to the PlayStation 3 controller, the first ever DualShock wireless controller, that was lasting between 16 to 18 hours. So looking at Sony's history and their track record, the newest DualSense Edge, it has the worst battery life ever for a PlayStation controller. That sounds like a pretty bad statement. Keep in mind, at the same time, it's a $200 controller and the most expensive and premium PlayStation controller ever. I guess all of this sort of explains why Sony is including this sort of premium looking, very long wire with it. I mean, they even include this little special device called the connector housing, which prevents the wire from detaching. So yeah, they know they know that the users of the Edge controller are gonna likely have this thing plugged in a lot of the time. I mean, looking down a year or 2 years after use, I'm pretty sure the battery life on this Edge controller is probably gonna be like 2 or 3 hours at most. So there you have it. That is the battery life of the DualSense Edge controller. Let me know what you think. Do you even care about battery life, or is this really a deal breaker for you? I mean, lasting 6 hours on a brand new fresh unit, and then knowing very well that a year or two down the road, that life is only going to go down to maybe 4 hours over time. Now, Sony does advise against tearing this controller open, so there is no official way to actually replace the battery. I'm sure there's going to be aftermarket stuff where you can go in and change out the battery, but it's not something, that's recommended from Sony. Anyways, let me know in the comments below what you think about this controller.